The rain started the night they pushed me out. It wasn't supposed to. The forecast had said clear skies, mild winds. But when I walked out of the boardroom, the company I had built from a cluttered apartment floor, where I had spent nights coding and crying and creating, the sky opened up like it was grieving with me. The marble floor of my company's lobby reflected the storm outside. My name, S. Malik Innovations, gleamed on the glass door, the one I had paid for with my first investor check. But now, even that name felt borrowed. Temporary. Like it was already being erased. Sarah, Daniel's voice called behind me. The man I had once loved so fiercely it terrified me. My co-founder, my husband of 7 years. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I turned. His tie was still loose, the same lazy knot I used to fix for him before investor meetings. But tonight I didn't move to touch it. The boardroom lights behind him flickered off one by one, as if the building itself wanted this over. Harder. My voice came out cracked, but it carried. You just voted me out of my own company. You know it's not personal, he said softly. Not personal. He had always been good with those words, gentle lies wrapped in calm tones. It's business, Sarah. You've been too emotional lately. Investors are worried. It's better this way. My throat burned. Investors? Or you and Lila? The name slipped out before I could stop it. Lila, my best friend, our company's marketing director. The woman who'd been there since the first brainstorm. I saw something flicker in Daniel's eyes. Not guilt exactly, but hesitation. That microsecond of truth before he put the mask back on. Don't do this, he murmured. Don't turn this into an affair. I snapped. Then tell me I'm wrong. He didn't. The silence between us stretched until the rain's patter became deafening. My chest hollowed out, cold and empty, like something had been ripped straight through it. When I finally turned to leave, I didn't look back. But I could feel his eyes on me, the same eyes that once looked at me like I was his entire future, now watching me as if I were a liability. The following weeks blurred into something unrecognizable. My emails were cut off. My access revoked. They even froze my equity, claiming procedural review. I'd walk past the glass tower I once owned, watching others walk into my legacy while I stood on the sidewalk like an outsider. And yet, every night I replayed that last look from Daniel. That flicker of something between fear and shame. That's what told me there was more to uncover. One night, unable to sleep, I opened my laptop, my old one, the one I hadn't touched since before our Series B funding. And there it was. A forgotten folder labeled Drafts. Inside were emails, backups from my co-founder account. Most were routine updates and investor notes. Until I found a message chain that made my blood go cold. From Lila Chen to Daniel Malik. Subject, transition strategy. She'll never see it coming. We just need her to sign the revised rights agreement first. After that, we can roll out the rebrand next quarter. Investors already agreed to back you as sole CEO. Don't worry, she trusts us. Well, I scrolled further. More threads. Private Slack messages. Even an unsigned term sheet naming him as majority shareholder. With my 37% reallocated to founder buyout. My hands trembled so violently I had to steady them against the desk. Betrayal was one thing, but this was theft wrapped in affection. I should have felt rage, but what I felt instead was clarity. Like something had clicked into place after months of fog. They wanted me gone because I was too emotional? Fine. I give them precision. I took out my journal. The one Daniel once joked was my second brain. He didn't know half of what was inside. Server logins, financial structures, Shell Corp data, every investor's private contact. The architecture of the company, the veins through which its blood, money, patents, brand flowed. And I had built every single one of them. That night, I started sketching what would become the blueprint of my revenge. Not out of bitterness, at least not entirely, but because something inside me had fractured, and rebuilding wasn't enough. I needed to redefine. They had taken my company, my trust, my marriage. So I decided, I'd take back my power. A week later, I got my first glimpse of them together in public. The photo appeared on TechWeekly's homepage. Power couple rebrands S. Malik Innovations to Luminate Labs. A new era of leadership. Lila's hand rested lightly on Daniel's chest. Both of them smiling. My company's logo blurred behind them, replaced with a pastel sunrise motif. They looked radiant, victorious, and for the first time I didn't cry. Instead, I felt something steadier rise inside me, quiet and razor-sharp. I began making calls. To Ravi, the cybersecurity consultant who still owed me a favor. To Kendra, the ex-investor Daniel had burned years ago, when he hit financial reports. To my cousin Aisha, an attorney who didn't flinch at gray areas. I told them all the same thing: it's time. They thought they'd erased me, but they'd forgotten who built the walls they were hiding behind. By the end of that week, I'd broken into a forgotten testing server. One Daniel had once called legacy code. It wasn't legacy anymore. It was leverage. Inside it sat a dormant smart contract, a blockchain clause tied to intellectual property rights I'd filed in my own name back in 2016, before we ever merged entities. If Luminate Labs used any of my core AI designs in production, that contract automatically entitled me to full intellectual ownership, and any revenue derived from it. I smiled for the first time in months. I didn't need to steal back my company. They'd already been building on my foundation, my code, my patents, my ideas. All I had to do was flip a switch. They told the world a story about a graceful handover. I read their press release with the same calm I used to read bug reports at 2 a.m, clinical, methodical, cataloging the lie. Daniel talked about strategic realignment. Lila thanked me for my foundational work and promised the company would honor its past while looking to the future. They didn't know I'd already rewritten the terms of that future. For 3 days after I triggered the smart contract, nothing happened. The waiting was worse than any boardroom confrontation because it let my mind roam, inventing outcomes that were either too small to satisfy or too big to be true. I filled the silence with movement. Long runs along the river, hands raw from the December wind. Long cold showers that stripped away whatever softness remained. Pages in my journal I had to tear out when they became too venomous to keep. At night I lay awake, listening for the sound of my phone. Every notification made my pulse spike as if it might be Daniel. A last attempt at explanation, or Lila, begging forgiveness. Neither came. The absence of those calls, the silence that followed, became part of the punishment they had handed me. I realized, with a clarity I hadn't felt in months, that they were trying to starve me not just of position but of acknowledgement, to make me disappear without trace. On the 4th morning, a small beep on my laptop punctured the quiet. An automated alert. A revenue notification from a microservice I'd left running long ago for testing. It was a fraction of a fraction, a single-line item that should have meant nothing. But the code I'd written treated nothing as nothing. It aggregated, compiled, and then, when thresholds were met, executed. The threshold had been met. The smart contract didn't scream. It didn't call a press conference. It just did its work. Ownership reassigned, revenue streams redirected. An immutable record written across the ledger that couldn't be countermanded by human charm or boardroom maneuvering. A cascade that started with my name, legally, verifiably, and spread through every micro-licensing agreement Daniel had quietly signed since the rebrand. Within 24 hours, small payments began to land in an account they didn't control. Within 72, the first notice went to Luminate Labs' legal team. An assertion of ownership, a demand for accounting, and a simple request: please explain how you are using IP registered in another name. I watched their faces on the news feeds. They went from confident to confused to cornered in a sequence that played like a slow-motion collision. Investors called frantic meetings. Lila, who had always been the more composed of the two, stopped posting curated smiles on social media. Daniel called once, exactly at midnight. The number blocked and then unblocked again in my phone's history as if he were testing my limits. "Sarah," he said, voice thin. "We can fix this. Talk to me." Part of me wanted to take the call, to hear his explanations, to feel the old warmth like a bandage. The rest of me wanted to hold his throat. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened later, his words were stitched with apology and pragmatism. He kept saying it was never supposed to be like this. He said we could negotiate. He said he loved me in that same quiet way he used when he wanted something from me. Each sentence was a replay of years of small betrayals. Evenings spent on the phone with investors while birthday candles burned, partnerships brokered without my knowledge, the way he used my trust as a resource. They'd built a network of half-truths that, until now, looked seamless. The first legal notice I received was a polite one. A cease and desist, sent on behalf of Luminate Labs, insisting that my actions constituted unauthorized access and interference with company operations. They wanted me to stop. They wanted my silence. The letter was precise, the kind of language lawyers use when they believe chess has turned into checkers. I sent my attorney Aisha a single sentence. Noted. Then I folded the letter and used it to reinforce one corner of a box of old prototype boards I had found in my storage unit. A small, petty ritual that felt like closing the lid on something that had tried to close on me. For every piece of legal post they sent, I sent back a ledger, painstaking, incontrovertible, and dull. I mapped every commit, every timestamp, every IP address. I printed patent filings and notes in my own handwriting. Affidavits from contractors who remembered my early, frantic nights. My case was not a flaring, emotional appeal. It was a slow, inexorable stacking of documents that would either crush their fabrications or make them fold. Cold. Precise. Mechanical. But revenge isn't only arithmetic. It demands a pulse, a narrative. The ledger could secure the money. The story would take the rest. So I started telling it. Not with press releases. Not with the hyperbolic posts founders trade to rally followers. I began with personal outreach, investors who'd been in the trenches with us before Daniel learned how to sweet-talk suits, engineers who'd left because of managerial cruelty that Lila had quietly enabled, friends who'd watched me carry the company in its worst months. I sent carefully written messages that didn't accuse, they just reminded. Do you remember the demo night in 2014? Do you remember who stayed up to debug at 3 a.m.? Each note was a breadcrumb, a nudge. People replied with anecdotes that threaded together into a tapestry that didn't fit the new, glossy narrative Lila and Daniel had tried to sell the world. The first real blow came when Ravi, the cybersecurity consultant, sent me a terse message. I've got something that solidifies your patent claims, but it'll be public. Are you ready? I clicked through to a repository he'd staged under my control. Emails between Daniel and a venture partner where he'd explicitly promised proprietary work would remain under our joint ownership. Those emails were the last little rivets that could secure the shifting structure Daniel had been building. I sat with the repository open and felt something taut inside me. Like a string being wound up to the point where it will snap or sing. I chose song. The media cycle is appetite-driven. It craves scandal that feels righteous. I found a journalist who had written sympathetically about women founders who were pushed out. We met in a cramped cafe that smelled of coffee and burnt pastry. She had questions that were clinical and kind. I answered, not with spectacle, but with the slow accumulation of fact. Dates, emails, contract clauses, the day-by-day erosion of control. Her piece was measured. It wasn't about dramatic betrayal so much as institutional theft dressed as corporate governance. It set a different tone than the press release Lila had polished. It asked uncomfortable questions about power and the hidden currency of affection in founding relationships. The article didn't declare winners. It asked for accountability. When the piece ran, social media did the rest. Investors who had been neutral asked for audits. A small class action rumble started among early contractors. Lila's curated feed began to receive notes. Not all angry, some bewildered, many inquisitive. Daniel called again. This time his voice cracked. You think you can take everything with headlines? He asked. Rage, brittle and white-hot. I never wanted to take everything, I said. I could feel the old ache at the edges of my words, the part of me that had once wanted him more than oxygen. I wanted you to keep your promises. His silence said more than any sentence could. He'd expected me to whine, to plead, to fade. He hadn't calculated my patience, the way disappointment had calcified into strategy. When the first escrow notification arrived, a clean, dispassionate email confirming that funds tied to licensing fees were now in a separate, legally monitored account, I felt a strange wash of relief. Not triumph. Not yet. Relief because the fight had finally become what it was. Not a private collapse, but a public arbitration. And then, because human beings are predictably terrible at leaving old comforts behind, the memory came back in a moment of absurd domesticity. A photograph I had kept in my wallet of the two of us on the roof of our first office, hair wild, faces flushed, eyes bright with the invincible nausea of building something new. I touched that photo and felt the hollowness behind my ribs like a missing tooth. I was furious at how much I still missed a man who had tried to erase me. I wrestled with shame that my revenge required him to suffer consequences. In the quiet, I asked myself the merciless questions I'd been avoiding. Who was I trying to punish? The lover who broke his vows, the co-founder who valued the brand more than its creator, or the part of myself that had once believed love and business could be the same ledger? There is a cruelty that comes from answers. Mine was both simple and jagged. All of them. He had stolen pieces of me and then used me to build his reputation. I wanted them to feel the sting of being unmoored, and I wanted to prove coldly and finally that I could survive, that I could transform loss into leverage. By the end of part 2, I had shifted the battlefield from the polished rooms where they hid to the architecture they'd ignored. The layers of code, contracts, and memories that truth could illuminate. My revenge was no longer only about money. It had become a reclamation of authorship, a reclamation of narrative. I knew the endgame would demand more than legal wins and public sympathy. It would require a confrontation that was both surgical and savage, precise in execution and terrible in emotion. I'd already set the ledger in motion. The next step would be to meet them where they thought they were untouchable. In a space that combined every one of their strengths. Spectacle, investors, and the vulnerable human need to be forgiven in public. When Daniel finally asked to meet face to face, not in the sterilized halls of law, but in the old conference room where our careers had begun, I knew the moment had come. The storm we'd both been circling was about to break, and I could feel like static in the air, that the last part of this story would not be tidy. I walked into that room carrying a folder that was heavier than any ledger. It held not only documents but the architecture of a life rebuilt. My hands were steady. My heart was not. The old conference room smelled of varnish and betrayal. They hadn't changed much since I'd last stood here. The same long glass table, the same skyline view, even the same art piece Daniel had chosen years ago. A minimalist canvas that looked like fractured light. Appropriate, I thought. Everything we'd built had fractured under the weight of ambition disguised as progress. Daniel stood when I walked in. Lila was already seated, hands clasped in her lap, the perfect image of remorse. For a fleeting second, I could almost imagine us back in the early days. 3 exhausted dreamers surviving on instant noodles and adrenaline. But nostalgia is a drug. I'd quit that habit. Sarah, Daniel said softly, as if the sound of my name could still tether me. Thank you for coming. Let's skip the pleasantries, I replied. I set my folder on the table. You wanted to meet. I assume this isn't about closure. He smiled, that same calculated corporate smile that had charmed investors and deceived me for years. We're all losing here. The litigation, the press. It's hurting the company. Hurting everyone. We can fix this if we work together again. My laugh was quiet but sharp. You mean you want me to clean up your mess? No, he said quickly. We want to make things right. Lila nodded, her voice almost a whisper. Sarah, please. We went too far. I didn't mean for it to. To what? I cut her off. To gut me quietly? To replace me while smiling in my face? To use my code, my marriage, and my name until you thought I was too tired to fight back. Her lip trembled. You don't understand. Oh, I do, I said. Better than either of you. I opened the folder and slid a document across the table. It was a financial summary. Not from their auditors, but from the federal regulators who'd taken sudden interest in how Luminate Labs was handling unregistered IP. Daniel's eyes flicked over the header, and his composure cracked. You went to the SEC, he muttered. I didn't have to, I said. They came to me when the blockchain entries showed discrepancies. You built your empire on stolen architecture. The moment you used my algorithm in your cloud systems, you invited scrutiny. His face drained of color. You could destroy everything. I tilted my head. I already did. Silence pulled thick between us. I could hear the low hum of the city below, the faint tick of the HVAC vent, my own heartbeat pressing behind my ribs. They had no idea that I'd been building this ending for months, that the code, the patents, the contracts were only the first part of the reckoning. I'm not here for money, I said finally. I already got that back. Daniel frowned. Then what do you want? I met his eyes. Acknowledgement. He blinked. What? I want the truth from you on record. That you used my work. That you froze me out. That you lied to the board. And I want you to do it publicly. Lila shifted in her chair. Sarah, you can't expect. I expect the truth, I said, my voice calm, deliberate. You always preach transparency to investors. Time to live it. Daniel laughed, bitter, defensive. You think humiliation is justice? I took a slow breath. No. I think accountability is. I stood, walked to the wall, and pressed the small silver button beneath the mounted screen. The black glass flickered to life. A red light blinked in the corner, recording in progress. Daniel's jaw clenched. You're recording this? Yes, I said. And it's being streamed to the same private investor channel you used to announce the rebrand. The color drained from Lila's face. Sarah, you always said transparency builds trust. I reminded them. Consider this your chance to rebuild. They both began talking over each other. Protests, excuses, the kind of frantic words people use when the truth finally has them cornered. I let them scramble, every syllable digging them deeper. Then Daniel's voice cracked. She's right, he said, surprising even himself. He stared down at his hands, his voice trembling. We took her work. We locked her out. I thought if we got far enough, the ends would justify it. Lila's breath hitched. Daniel. He didn't stop. We convinced ourselves she'd moved on, that she was unstable, too emotional. But she was the reason any of this existed. He finally looked at me, not with power, not even apology, but something closer to surrender. I'm sorry. The words hung there, small fragile things that had come years too late. I turned off the screen. Thank you, I said quietly. That's all I needed. Is that it? Lila asked, voice cracking. You got your confession. You won. What now? I gathered my folder, feeling the surreal lightness that comes when the storm finally breaks. Now, I said, smiling faintly. Now you get to rebuild honestly this time. Without me. As I reached the door, Daniel called out. You could have ruined us completely. Why stop here? I turned back, meeting his gaze one last time. Because you ruined us already. I just chose to end it with dignity. And with that, I left the room, not running, not shaking, just walking through the rain-polished corridor of my past and into the clean, unmarked air beyond it. The fallout was brutal. The recording went viral. Investors withdrew, citing ethical violations. Within weeks, Luminate Labs collapsed under its own deceit. The settlement came quietly. A $4.5 million transfer to my account. My intellectual property's full assessed value. The irony didn't escape me. They'd once told me I was too emotional for business. Now I dismantled their empire with nothing but logic and restraint. But revenge has a way of leaving ghosts. Sometimes I still catch myself thinking of the night Daniel and I first dreamed up the company. The flicker of neon through our window, his hand brushing mine over a cup of coffee gone cold. Love had built that company. Ambition had buried it. One morning I woke before dawn and drove past the old office tower. The logo was gone now, the glass facade empty, a reflection of everything I'd lost and reclaimed. I rolled down the window, breathing in the faint metallic scent of rain. The world smelled clean again. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply exhaled. A quiet final goodbye to the ghosts of ambition and love that had once defined me. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the scars and the strategy, I realized something terrifyingly simple. I hadn't destroyed them to prove I could win. I'd done it to remember that I'd built it all once, and I could build again.